Okay, so be honest with me. You know the day and night cycle on Battlefield? Okay, I'm sure you do, but here, I'll play it out anyways. Okay. How many of you did not know that this day and night cycle is actually a solar eclipse? That's like super cool, isn't it? And if you did already know that and you just want to yell at me, then consider this just a cheeky segue into me showing off these awesome pictures I took of the real solar eclipse that happened recently. Aren't these also super awesome? Okay, yeah, onto the main course. Normally you'd only see two types of throws that result from Ridley's side special. One involves you just letting it play out, where he does an underhand throw at the ledge and deals some pretty good knockback, KOing at around 120 or so. The other involves you manually releasing the opponent, which still does some knockback but not nearly as much, KOing closer to around 240. But what if I told you there's a secret third thing? And no, not having the move get cancelled by the opponent mashing. For this third type of throw, all you have to do is let the side special play out, but have it run into a wall. Looking at it in slow motion, we can clearly tell that the animation is different, where instead of just tossing the opponent, Ridley's very intuitively slamming their body against the wall before launching them, which is arguably a lot cooler, and to some demographics hotter. What's more important to note is the damage though. The other two types of throws deal 8.4%, accounting just for the throw damage not getting dragged. But for the wall slam version, the final throw deals 14.4%, which is pretty close to double the damage. And I also want to point out that this slam is not techable. Like, I know there's this blue-green ring around Samus here, but I think that's technically just for like the first part of the slam, whereas the knockback happens like afterwards or whatever. So no matter how hard I tried, there was just no teching this. The reason why I say this is a secret thing is because of how it requires a wall. Obviously, just a slightly slanted slope of slippery, slimy slopiness won't do it, but when you really step back to look at the game's selection of stages, outside of Stage Builder, there's a relatively scarce amount of just walls, you know? Not to mention how the animation and damage output look pretty much the same as normal in real time, so I doubt a lot of people even knew that this was technically its own variant. But there's a certain setting where this is actually impossible to happen. That being, you know, competitive, where walls are generally banned. And while stage walls aren't banned, they also don't work, since the moment Ridley's airborne while grabbing someone, his momentum just goes completely downwards and you don't end up crashing into any walls. So unfortunately that means this arguably superior version of Ridley's Space Pirate Rush is just never going to happen in a competitive environment. Oh, right. Okay, cool, so Steve's blocks act essentially as walls, and you only need one block on the ground for it to trigger this special throw. So that's pretty neat. A slightly stronger version of Ridley's side special is technically possible in competitive. And because it's possible to happen in competitive, that means I'm allowed to give it an official name instead of just saying Wall Slam side special. I think we should call this the Juicy Lucy. So now we know there's plenty of juice to be loosed in competitive, but is there really any use for this? Surely it's not that impactful for the move to just deal an extra 6%. Okay, so Steve is a pretty light character, so let's get some new numbers here. A normal side special release at the ledge will barely KO him when he's around 92%. If we place blocks right here, Steve gets KO'd as early as 60%, and it's a lot more reassured even still as low as 70%. And that's even considering the discrepancy of where the knockback started. The first test had Steve already technically off stage, and this one has him over here. Basically, without being super roundabout like I like to be, this variant of Ridley's side special is actually considerably stronger. And when you're up against an opponent that can make walls anywhere, especially so close to the side blast zones, yeah, there's a lot of use for this one. Like, even having a wall in the center of the stage still gets Steve KO'd at the side blast zone around 90%, on par with when he was being tossed without any Lucy juice at the stage's ledge. And because I know there are definitely some Steve mains watching right now, I will just say that no, you can't DI, don't even try to DI. If this happens to you, just give up and do not try to DI this. Thank you. It's not like this is a complete buff, as if you're coming at it from the wrong angle, say the block being in the way of the ledge as you're going towards it, then here the Juicy Lucy will be forced to try and KO from the other blast zone, which is less effective than if the blocks just weren't there. But even then, the difference is pretty minuscule, so I'd say this is a powerful technique when facing Steve, and definitely means Ridley is now a hard counter, I think, maybe. Oh, and this tech was from a tweet by Sapphire Storm, so credit goes to them for that, but I will not be asking for their permission to keep calling it the Juicy Lucy. Also, as a heads up going forward for the channel, ever since my hard drive got fried, I lost a decent number of things I forgot to back up. So while I wrote down a lot of facts on Google Docs, which are obviously safe, a lot of the screenshots I took for proof of who provided them are now gone, so oopsies. I'll talk more about myself at the end of the video, but for now, let's just keep discussing stuff with Steve, with this tweet by Steve Labs in regards to Rob. Normally, for the pressure plate to activate Steve's TNT, it gets set off when someone steps on it, obviously, right? And it's typically pretty intuitive. Mario's shoe lands on the pressure plate and he steps on it. Steve's pixels step on it, pressing it down, yada yada. Even for larger figures, while it's not quite perfect, it's all intuitive enough for it to seem really stupid that I'm even explaining this, right? Like you're probably throwing things at your screen right now. So let's just chill out and take a look at Rob here. Let's get a quick zoom in here. Yeah, literally the entire pressure plate is covered by Rob's, what do you call this? I was gonna say butt cheeks, and yet not even being set off. On paper, this may appear like a really interesting example of how character positions could just be at their center mass, and thus not properly reflected by a character's girth in some scenarios. After all, the pressure plate does get triggered once it reaches around the center portion of Rob's tush, about in line with his spine rod section, but I found that it's a little bit more interesting to talk about than just that. For one, here I'm clearly not activating the pressure plate despite being all the way in it, but while being all the way over here, if I start a taunt, well, now it's getting activated just fine. Despite the fact that it at least looks like Rob's center of mass hasn't actually changed, if we're going by logic that it is his spine rod, I don't know. But maybe I'm wrong, maybe it has changed, and that's why the taunt has an easier time setting it off. For now, let's just look at some other examples of wide, girthy characters just out of curiosity. If we look at DK approach the pressure plate, we might assume that the same thing as Rob is happening here. After all, he's well onto the plate, yet it's not being set off. Though, looking at it from a different perspective, I guess you could make the claim that it's because his fists technically aren't hitting the pressure plate. Like, it's still kind of funky, but one thing I did notice is that if you approach it from behind, DK triggers the plate super easily. You could see that and then say, hey, it's because DK's actual feet are in the back half of his model, so that makes sense. And you can further see this correlation with his actual feet, as that marks the timing of when he sets it off while facing forwards anyways, so it's clearly important. So I wanted to see about Rob, and yeah, just like DK, if you approach it while looking backwards, the butt of his rear end actually has zero issues triggering the plate. This might even explain why his taunt also has no issues, since that portion does get rotated during it. And no, this isn't just a thing with them jumping, as doing that in the same position as the test from before doesn't change anything. Does this just mean that Rob's true feet are at his back? It's not like everyone's character positions are naturally behind their models, as the examples we saw at the start of this section clearly showed their feet hitting the pressure plate in front of them. So let's just keep looking at other examples because it's fun. When Ridley steps on the pressure plate, it gets activated the moment even one of his claws land on it. And for DDD, it seems very clearly tied to his foot stumps. When he does a slow walk, he sort of just takes a big step forward and then shuffles his body in, and the pressure plate gets triggered specifically when his foot touches it, regardless of if it's far away or close to the body. So that seems like a pretty clear indication that the plate relies on the character's feet slipping on them rather than like a portion of their body itself. So I guess technically feet are part of the body. You get what I mean. I was gonna test other characters like Rob who have ambiguous feet, but the only real example I could think of was Piranha Plant, who had no issue triggering the pressure plate, and if anything I think the game kinda overcompensated for it. Really, there's a surprising number of normal feet, or some equivalent, and the only other idea I had out of curiosity was Dark Samus, who does have feet but usually floats rather than walks. And for them, the pressure plate gets set off in line with their center of mass, despite the fact that no feet are touching them. So that clearly is some kind of factor to consider. But then going to a regular Samus, we can see that the activation has a direct correlation to her foot's position, even though her center of mass is much farther off. So, is there a takeaway to all this? Probably, but I'm not qualified to take things away, so I'm just gonna leave it at that series of observations about a niche thing that people may or may not think of, and pretend to be smart by using mildly eloquent language. Oh, and have you ever noticed that the redstone in Smash is actually a 3D model, even though in Minecraft it's just a texture? Obviously this was necessary to make it visible from the side, but I thought it was interesting. Also, I was curious about how size change played a role in all this. Unfortunately, Steve himself changing size doesn't actually affect the TNT nor the pressure plate in any way, which actually looks kinda dumb. And interactions with the pressure plate while being small didn't really do much other than confirm that Rob's backside apparently has much more weight to it than the rest of him. But it's really funny seeing a Giga Rob interact with a pressure plate, because the properties of which part of his model trigger the plate are technically the same, so you can completely overwhelm it and still not set it off, which looks super dumb. And going into Custom Smash, normally this setting with size changes does actually translate to other things that the temporary size change items wouldn't, but for here, no, the TNT and such still have the same size. Which is actually kind of weird. I guess I never really considered how nerfed Steve gets in these types of settings. But with a Giga Ultra Rob on a normal pressure plate, it gets to the point where I can stand directly over it, and even do the taunt which normally instantly sets it off, and yet nothing happens. I guess that part of Rob's real butt feet, whatever that normally sets it off, is just getting rotated so far into the Z-axis that it doesn't trigger the plate. I don't even know what's happening, honestly. Like, at this point, the pressure plate just might as well not exist, and I find that really funny and stupid, just like me. Next, there's a few entries from the Smash Wiki for the Daybreak that I wanted to talk about. So first, here's an entry about double jumps while carrying the Daybreak. See, for normal shooting items, the sound effects are removed for the double jump, which makes sense considering you're not actually doing your normal animation. This is best seen with Mario using the Fire Flower. Normally his double jump makes some flip sounds to accommodate his flipping, and occasionally has him say wahoo, as he's known for in the business. But while using the Fire Flower, the sound is completely removed. But then when we use the Daybreak, you can hear that all the flips are back in action, as well as his voice line. This is pretty likely an oversight, since the logic for the Daybreak should be the same for other held shooting items. Also, it's very interesting to pay attention to these flipping sounds. See, for Mario's basic double jump, only a few flip sounds play because he's only flipping for a short amount of time. However, when he does his backwards double jump, this flip sound plays up for much longer because, you know, he's flipping a lot more. He's going kind of crazy here. But regardless of which direction I jump while carrying the Daybreak, the glitched flip sound is always short, likely suggesting that it's copying the sound effects from a normal double jump. At least that's my idea. And next, there's an entry about characters holding their items during hit stun. You can see how for a normal character like Roy, when he gets put in hit stun while holding the Daybreak, he's still holding his sword as he should. Yet for a character like Marth, the sword is not there. Wow! Okay, I'll be straightforward, I don't think this is really a hit stun thing, but more so just how certain characters react to holding the Daybreak. You can barely see that Roy has his sword held under the Daybreak here, whereas for Marth, it appears to have been sheathed. So obviously this choice would carry over to hit stun, right? And it's not just a case with holding something with two hands, as say for Ike, he clearly holds his sword even in this case, and you can do this super gnarly spin attack, yo! And then it goes away for the Daybreak. This is most noticeable with King Dedede, who normally always holds his hammer. It's like half of his entity. Yeah, goes away with the Daybreak. He almost feels naked like this. I don't like it. Also, Robin is kinda weird, as his sword does seem to disappear while holding the Daybreak normally, but then reappears when he's in hit stun, so maybe hit stun is still some kind of factor. Like, I tried looking at it in the camera to see if maybe the sword was just hidden in the Daybreak model, but it's really hard to tell. You can see the frame before it disappears that the sword gets super small. So it's either that the sword is still present but was just shrunk down a ton for some reason and is just inside the Daybreak, or this shrinking frame was just it getting ready to disappear outright. Either way, it's dumb and stupid, just like me. Lastly, we all know about the famous sacred combo, right? Sweet spot knee into Falcon Punch. Like Halloween candy and fentanyl, it's a match made in heaven. So let's ignore that and talk about the opposite. What if you could do all that in reverse, the Blasphemous Combo as I just decided to call it, and yet have it be a true combo in Smash Ultimate? Wouldn't that be like super rad? Okay, cool, but like what if you could do all that for real?
Show me your moves.
Yes, the simple idea here is to just cancel any big attacks by using someone else's attack, thus essentially reducing the end lag of anything to 0. It's a pretty basic concept on paper, but given how it can absolutely be done even in a more practical setting, by say shielding someone's rapid jab and then attacking them after they fall out of range, it's actually a really intriguing combo setup that leaves a lot of potential. But I'm not really going to go into the specifics here because I got the idea for this from Grace and Glory's Twitter, and they've now since made a whole video about it on their own YouTube channel, which of course I will link below. So if you're at all curious about learning more about that, then you might as well just go watch that, you know. I don't want to work anymore. I'm tired. So now do what you want with your life because the video is done. Though I am going to, as the kids say nowadays, yap for a bit in these last few minutes. So if you don't hate me super bad, then feel free to stick around, or don't. Anyways, hi! Yeah, I've had a little bit of a break from uploads, a combination of focusing on new school activities and dealing with the fact that my old hard drive got suddenly exploded. Like, not literally, but you know. I had to replace it eventually, and luckily a lot of the important stuff is already on, like, external hard drive sticks. But not everything, so, you know, it's just been a whole process. Really, outside of a lot of music files over the years, the biggest loss was just the screenshots I took as evidence for a lot of the fax submissions I've gotten over all of these years, as I mentioned before. I'm still debating on how I want to handle this. For the purposes of today's video, it didn't really matter since I saved links to their sources in my docs, but for other things I won't be able to do that, so I don't know. I really like maintaining some sort of quote-unquote professional integrity by citing who tells me what rather than pretending I'm some omniscient god of smash facts. But I think moving forward, if I have a cool fact I want to talk about written down on a document but I don't have the source, I think I'll just still talk about it. It's a shame, but it's not like I ever try to credit myself as the discoverer of all things anyways, so I think it should be fine. Also, some of you might have noticed how I covered a wiki trivia thing near the end of this video, right? Yeah, at this point I think it's just kind of silly for me to have that series as its own thing. I think it worked well when I first started doing that, but at this point it just makes more sense to have it be a part of the whole random facts pool. I wanted to try and act like I had more variety in my channel by having a different series, but let's be honest, it wasn't actually that different, so might as well just squish them together, you know? Anyways, I really appreciate anyone watching this. I haven't taken a break from YouTube this long, like, I don't think ever in the channel's history, so any continued interest in my content makes me very happy. Like, I'm smiling very big right now. You just can't see it. Also, I want to thank all my lovely patrons for their continued support, even through this drought, those being Raighne, Soul700, Burbo, SpiderJew, and everyone else. I really appreciate it, and I promise to start uploading a bit more consistently again. Okay, be sure to wash your dishes and stay casual. Well, I'll see y'all later.